I'm Rachel, 30 years old, and nothing prepared me for burying my 4-month-old daughter Emma while my parents attended my brother's pool party instead. The tiny white casket, the flowers, the teddy bears, all witnessed by everyone except my own mom and dad, who decided Jason's backyard celebration was more important. In my grief-stricken haze, I made a promise at Emma's grave that day. My parents would understand exactly what they'd done, and I would make absolutely sure they'd regret their choice forever. Where are you watching from today? Drop a comment below, hit that like and subscribe button, and join me for a journey through the most heartbreaking and eye-opening chapter of my life. Growing up in the suburbs of Atlanta, Georgia, I always felt like I was competing for attention I never quite earned. My parents, Linda and Robert, weren't abusive or cruel. Their neglect was subtle but persistent, especially when it came to comparing me to my younger brother Jason. He was their pride and joy from the moment he was born. 3 years after me, I still remember my 10th birthday, when I worked so hard on my science project that won first place at the regional competition. The ceremony was scheduled for 6 o'clock on a Thursday evening. My parents promised they'd be there, but Jason had a little league game that ran late. They never showed up at my award ceremony. When I got home, clutching my blue ribbon, Mom just said, "That's nice, honey," while helping Jason clean his cleats. Dad didn't even look up from helping Jason practice his swing in the living room. This pattern continued throughout high school. I graduated as valedictorian, but my parents left right after my speech because Jason had a summer league game the evening. College applications, academic scholarships, dean's list every semester. None of it seemed to register with the same enthusiasm as Jason making second string on his college baseball team. Despite the obvious favoritism, I tried to maintain a relationship with Jason. We weren't close, but I made efforts, calling him at college, sending care packages, attending his games when I could. He accepted my attention without reciprocating, much comfortable in his position as the family favorite. After college, I built a successful career as a medical sales representative. The validation I received from my professional achievements helped fill the void my parents' emotional distance had created. I met Michael during a sales call to his medical practice, and we connected instantly. After dating for 2 years, we married in a beautiful ceremony where, predictably, my parents spent most of the reception talking about Jason's new job offer. What struck me most powerfully about Michael was his family. The Carters welcomed me with genuine warmth and interest. My mother-in-law Patricia would call just to chat, asking thoughtful questions about my work and life. My father-in-law Thomas took pride in my career accomplishments, bragging about them to his friends. For the first time, I experienced what real family support felt like. When Michael and I decided to try for a baby after 3 years of marriage, we were overjoyed to conceive quickly. I called my parents immediately after confirming the pregnancy. Mom's response was, "That's nice, dear. Did Jason tell you he's putting in a new pool? It's going to be incredible. The whole neighborhood is talking about it." The contrast between our families continued throughout my pregnancy. Michael's parents threw us a beautiful baby shower, while mine attended briefly, bringing a generic gift card and spending most of the event showing people pictures of Jason's house renovations on their phones. Patricia helped us set up the nursery, spending weekends painting clouds on the ceiling and assembling furniture, while my parents declined our invitation to help because they were assisting Jason with picking out pool tiles. When Emma was born, 7 pounds, 3 ounces of absolute perfection with Michael's dark hair and my green eyes. The hospital room filled with Michael's family bearing gifts, taking turns holding her, and bringing us home-cooked meals. My parents visited for 30 minutes, took a few photos, then left because they needed to help Jason install new landscaping around his pool area. Still, those first 4 months with Emma were the happiest of my life. She was an easy baby with a sunny disposition. She slept well, rarely fussed, and had just started giving us gummy smiles that melted our hearts. Her nursery was a wonderland of soft yellows and greens with a handmade mobile Patricia had. Crafted from felled animals, Michael proved to be an incredible father, getting up for night feedings and singing silly songs he made up just for her. We were exhausted, but blissfully happy in our little cocoon of new parenthood. I'd even started to make peace with my parents' emotional distance. Their loss, I thought. They were missing out on knowing this amazing little person. I had Michael, his family, and now, Emmer, we were complete. I had no idea how quickly and tragically everything would change. The morning it happened started like any other. It was a Tuesday in April, the spring sunshine streaming through Emma's nursery blinds. I'd fed her at 5 a.m., and she'd fallen back asleep easily. When I didn't hear her usual 7 o'clock babbling through the baby monitor, I initially felt grateful for the extra sleep. By 8, the silence felt wrong. I patted down the hole to peek in on her, expecting to see her still sleeping peacefully. The image that greeted me instead has been burned into my memory forever. Emma lying still, her lips tinged slightly blue, not responding when I called her name. Everything after that exists in fragmented, nightmarish flashes, screaming for Michael, him rushing in, immediately beginning CPR while I called 911 with shaking hands, the paramedics arriving, their faces grim as they worked on her tiny body, the ambulance ride with Emmer, machines beeping, a kind paramedic holding my hand while Michael followed in our car. The emergency room was a blur of activity. Doctors, nurses, equipment rolled in and out. They worked on her for 45 minutes before the lead doctor approached us in the family waiting room. His face told me everything before he spoke a word. I'm so sorry. We did everything we could. Michael collapsed into a chair, his body shaking with silent sobs. I stood frozen, unable to process what I was hearing. This couldn't be real. We'd just put her to bed last night. She'd been perfectly healthy. How could she just be gone? The doctor explained in gentle terms. Sudden infant death syndrome, SIDS. The unexplained death of an otherwise healthy baby during sleep. He assured us we'd done nothing wrong. We'd followed all the safety guidelines for her crib. She'd been placed on her back, no blankets or toys nearby. Sometimes, he explained, it just happens, and medical science still doesn't fully understand why. The next few hours passed in a fog. We were led to a private room where they brought Emma to us. Wrapped in a hospital blanket, she looked peaceful, like she was sleeping, which somehow made it all the more impossible to comprehend. We held her, memorizing every feature of her perfect face, until we could no longer deny the reality that she was gone. I called my parents from the hospital, my voice breaking as I delivered the unthinkable news. Mom gasped and said all the expected things. Oh my God, and I can't believe it, and we're so sorry. Dad got on the line too, sounding genuinely shaken. They promised to come right over. When they arrived at the hospital 2 hours later, they hugged us awkwardly and sat with us briefly. Mom kept checking her phone, which I attributed to shock or discomfort with the situation. As they were leaving, Mom mentioned something that didn't fully register at the time. This is such terrible timing. Jason's big pool party is this weekend. He's been planning it for months to show off the finished project. I nodded absently, unable to care about anything as trivial as a pool party in that moment. Michael's parents had already arrived and were making arrangements to stay with us, helping contact other family members and friends. The next day, we met with a funeral director. Words I never imagined speaking in relation to my infant daughter. The choices were unbearable. Tiny casket selections. What outfit she should wear for eternity. What music should play as we said goodbye to a life barely begun. Michael's mother held my hand through all of it while his father handled the paperwork. My parents called to say they were too emotional to participate in the planning, but would contribute financially. The funeral was scheduled for Saturday, 4 days away. I called my parents the evening to confirm the details, expecting them to rearrange any plans they had. Mom sounded distracted on the phone. Saturday at 11. Got it. We'll try to be there. What cemetery did you decide on? Her phrasing struck me as odd. Try to be there. What could possibly be more important than their granddaughter's funeral? What do you mean? Try? I asked. Well, it's just that Jason's pool party is Saturday afternoon. We promised we'd help him set up in the morning. I thought I must have misunderstood, but you'll come to the funeral first, right? Jason can wait a few hours. The pause before she answered was too long. Let me talk to your father about it. We'll figure something out. I hung up feeling uneasy, but pushed the concern aside. Surely, my parents wouldn't miss Emma's funeral for a pool party. Not even they could be that callous. I focused instead on getting through each painful hour, leaning heavily on Michael and his parents for support. 2 days before the funeral, my phone rang with my mother's ringtone. I answered immediately, assuming she was calling about funeral arrangements or to offer support. Rachel, honey, I wanted to talk to you about Saturday, she began, her voice carrying that false brightness she used when delivering disappointing news. Your father and I have been discussing it, and we think we'll have to miss the funeral. For a moment, I couldn't process what she was saying. Miss it? What do you mean? Well, Jason's pool party starts at 2. But we need to be there by 9 to help set up. It's his big reveal after months of work, and all his friends and neighbors will be there. He's counting on us. The blood drained from my face. Mom, Emma's funeral is at 11. Your granddaughter's funeral? I know, sweetie. And we're just heartbroken about Emma, truly. But Jason has been planning this for so long, and he's put so much money into this pool. He'd be devastated if we canceled on him now. My voice shook with disbelief. Are you seriously telling me that Jason's pool party is more important than saying goodbye to your granddaughter? Don't put it like that, Rachel. It's not about importance. It's about Jason counting on us. We already promised him. And what about what I need right now? What about paying respects to Emma? She sighed. Rachel, you've always been so independent. Jason needs us more than you do. You have Michael and his parents. The casual cruelty of her statement left me speechless. After a moment, I heard rustling on the line, and my father's voice replaced hers. Rachel, listen to me. What happened to Emma is terrible, and we're grieving too. But life goes on. We can't cancel everything because of this tragedy. This tragedy, I repeated, my voice rising. This tragedy is your granddaughter dying. This isn't a sprained ankle or a fender bender. She's gone forever. And you won't spend hours at her funeral because of a pool party. Now you're being dramatic, Dad said, his tone hardening. We can visit the grave another time, when things are less hectic. Jason has 100 people coming to this event. We can't let him down. The conversation deteriorated from there. I screamed. I pleaded. I broke down sobbing. Nothing moved them. The pool party was their priority, and they wouldn't budge. When I finally hung up, I was shaking so badly that Michael had to take the phone from my hand. After I explained what had happened, Michael's face contorted with rage I'd never seen before. They can't be serious. This is beyond belief. His mother, who had overheard, came into the room with tears streaming down her face. Oh, Rachel, I'm so sorry. I can't imagine how anyone can make such a choice. That evening, a text from Jason appeared on my phone. Mom said you're making a big deal about Saturday. Look, I'm sorry about the baby, but my party's been planned for months. They'll be at your sad event another time. Don't guilt trip them. The callousness of referring to my daughter's funeral as a sad event sent me into another tailspin of grief and anger. I showed the text to Michael, who nearly threw my phone across the room in fury. I reached out to my Aunt Catherine, my mother's sister, hoping she might intervene. Her shock matched our own. Rachel, I can't believe Linda would do this. Let me talk to her. She called back hours later. Defeated. I'm so sorry. She won't budge. Robert and she insists they've already committed to Jason. I'll be at the funeral, honey. So will Uncle Jim. The night before the funeral, I still held a shred of hope that my parents would change their minds. That basic human decency would prevail. But as I was sitting in Emma's nursery, rocking in the chair where I'd spent countless hours feeding her, my phone pinged with a notification. Jason had posted on Instagram, "Pool party prep underway. Thanks to mom and dad for spending the day helping get everything perfect for tomorrow's epic reveal. Hashtag best prints." Over the photo showed my parents smiling broadly, ranging lounge chairs around my brother's new pool, colorful party decorations visible in the background. The timestamp showed it had been taken just an hour ago. Well, Michael and I were meeting with the minister for our daughter's service. Something broke inside me at that moment. A dam of grief, rage, and lifelong hurt burst open. For 30 years, I had made excuses for my parents' behavior, always assuming that somehow I wasn't trying hard enough to earn their love and attention. Now, facing the most devastating loss imaginable, they had made their priorities crystal clear. My daughter deserved better. I deserved better. And in that moment, sitting in the silent nursery surrounded by toys that would never be played with again, I made a decision. This would be the last time my parents would ever hurt me, and they would face consequences for this betrayal that they couldn't possibly imagine. Saturday morning arrived with inappropriately beautiful weather. Sunshine streamed through our bedroom windows as I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the black dress laid out for me. Michael moved quietly around the room, already dressed in his dark suit, his eyes red-rimmed from another night of little sleep. "I keep thinking this is a nightmare I'll wake up from," I whispered as he sat beside me. "Not just Emma, but all of it." He took my hand and pressed it to his lips. "No, I'm here." Getting dressed felt like moving underwater. Each button, each earring, each brush stroke through my hair required monumental effort. The thought of facing the day, of standing beside that tiny casket without my parents there, made me physically ill. Michael's parents arrived early to drive with us to the church, Patricia enfolding me in a gentle hug that nearly broke me before we'd even left the house. "We're with you every step of the way," she murmured against my hair. Thomas stood nearby, his usual jovial face solemn with shared grief. The church looked beautiful in a way that made my heart ache. White lilies and pink roses surrounded the small white casket at the front. Emma's favorite stuffed rabbit, a gift from Michael's sister, sat atop it, along with a framed photo of her smiling in her father's arms. Soft instrumental music played as people began to arrive. I stood in a daze as friends, colleagues, neighbors, and extended family filed in. My college roommate had flown in from California. Michael's entire medical practice had closed for the day, so the staff could attend. Neighbors I barely knew brought food and flowers. My Aunt Catherine and Uncle Jim arrived early, hugging me fiercely and pointedly not mentioning my parents. As the service was about to begin, I couldn't help scanning the room one final time, some irrational part of me still expecting to see my parents rush in at the last minute. Instead, I saw two conspicuously empty seats in the front row, their absence of physical presence, a statement visible to everyone in attendance. Throughout the beautiful but agonizing service, I felt disconnected from my body, watching the proceedings as if from a distance. Michael's voice broke repeatedly as he read the poem we had written for Emma. The minister spoke kindly about a life cut short but deeply loved. A slideshow of photos, Emma's birth, her first bath, her gummy smiles, played on a screen, while music selected by Patricia filled the church. I was aware of the whispers, the confused glances toward the empty seats beside me. Where were her parents? Why weren't they here? I could read the questions on people's faces, the uncomfortable speculation. My humiliation burned alongside my grief. After the final prayer, people approached to offer condolences. The inevitable question came again and again, each time like a fresh wound. Are your parents not able to be here today? Each time, I had to choose between lying to protect them or telling the shameful truth. I settled on a response that was factually accurate but deliberately vague. They had a prior commitment they chose not to reschedule. The shocked expressions, the awkward pauses that followed, were excruciating. Some people clearly thought there must be some extraordinary circumstance. Perhaps my parents were deathly ill or stranded overseas. Others seemed to understand immediately and responded with extra kindness. As if trying to compensate for my parents' absence, the graveside service was mercifully brief. I couldn't bear to watch as they lowered that tiny casket into the ground. Michael held me upright when my knees threatened to buckle. His parents stood on my other side, a physical barrier between me and the curious stares of other mourners. Afterward, people gathered at our home. Michael's mother had coordinated with friends to arrange food and drinks. The house filled with a low murmur of conversation, occasional tearful laughter at a shared memory, the clink of glasses and plates. I moved through it all like a ghost, accepting hugs, nodding at condolences, unable to eat a single bite. Throughout the afternoon, I kept checking my phone. No messages from my parents, no calls, not even a text asking how the service had gone. As evening approached and guests began to leave, I made the mistake of checking Instagram. Jason had posted a series of photos from his pool party. Music, drinks, dozens of people lounging round the new pool, and there were my parents in several shots, smiling broadly, helping serve food, toasting with champagne, not a hint of grief or conflict on their faces. The caption read, "Best pool party ever. Thanks Mom and Dad for making it perfect. #blessed. Michael found me sobbing in our bedroom, clutching my phone. When I showed him the photos, his face hardened with anger I'd rarely seen. They're posting party pictures during our daughter's funeral. This is beyond comprehension. His mother appeared in the doorway, concern etched on her face. When she saw the photos, she sat beside me and took the phone gently from my hands. Oh, Rachel, I don't even have words. I've spent my whole life making excuses for them, I said through tears, telling myself that if I just achieved more, if I was more understanding of Jason's needs, if I didn't make such a fuss, they would love me the way they love him. But this, Thomas joined us, placing a supportive hand on Michael's shoulder. Some people don't deserve the title of parent, much less grandparent, he said quietly. After everyone had gone, Michael and I sat in Emma's nursery, surrounded by the remnants of our brief time with her. The mobile Patricia had made turn slowly in the gentle breeze from the window. Emma's clothes still hung in the closet, her diapers still sat stacked on a changing table. I can't do this anymore, I said finally, my voice steady despite the tears still streaming down my face. I can't keep trying with them. Not after this. Michael nodded, taking my hand. Whatever you decide about your relationship with them, I support you completely. That night, I made a silent promise to Emma as I finally fell into exhausted sleep. I would no longer accept scraps of attention from people who had proven, in the most painful way possible, that I would always come second, and somehow, I would make sure they understood exactly what they had done. The week after Emma's funeral passed in a blur of paperwork, thank you notes for funeral attendees, and the overwhelming task of trying to find a new normal in a world without our daughter. Michael returned to work part-time, needing the structure and purpose his medical practice provided. I took extended leave from my sales position, unable to imagine making cheerful pitches to doctors about medical devices when my world had collapsed. 7 days after we buried Emma, my phone rang with my mother's number. I stared at it for several rings before answering, my heart pounding with renewed anger. Hello? I kept my voice neutral. Rachel, it's Mom. We were thinking of stopping by this afternoon to see how you're doing. The casual tone, as if we'd simply missed connecting at a social event rather than them skipping their granddaughter's funeral, left me momentarily speechless. That won't work for me, I finally managed. Oh, she sounded genuinely surprised. Well, how about tomorrow then? We could bring lunch. No, Mom, I don't want to see you or Dad. Not tomorrow. Not next week. There was a pause before she responded, her voice taking on the injured tone I knew so well. Rachel, I understand you're grieving. But that's no reason to shut out family. We're hurting too. You know, hurting, I repeated, my voice rising despite my resolve to stay calm. You were partying while we buried Emmer. You were posing for pictures with drinks while I watched them put my baby in the ground. Now, that's not fair. Jason's event was planned months in advance. We explained that to you. You don't get it, do you? Nothing was more important than being there that day. Nothing. We've always been there for you, Rachel. I don't know why you're being so dramatic about this one thing. One thing, my daughter's funeral reduced to one thing they'd missed, like a school play or dinner invitation. I have to go, I said, unable to continue the conversation without completely breaking down. Rachel, wait. I hung up and blocked both their numbers. Over the next few weeks, the pattern repeated itself. My parents tried to contact me through different means, emails, messages through Michael, even showing up at our house unannounced one Sunday afternoon. Each time, I refused to engage. Michael supported my decision completely, running interference when necessary. Meanwhile, extended family members began reaching out. Having heard different versions of what had happened, Mai and Catherine called, horrified after seeing Jason's pool party photos dated the same day as Emmer's funeral. Rachel, I had no idea they actually went through with the party. I thought maybe they'd stop by the funeral briefly and then go to Jason's later. This is unconscionable. Other relatives expressed similar shock. My cousin Megan, who had attended the funeral, was particularly outraged. Everyone was asking where they were. I was so embarrassed for you, having to make excuses for them. I hadn't made excuses, but it was telling that she assumed I had. That had been my pattern for 30 years. Cover for my parents, rationalize their behavior, protect them from judgment. Not anymore, at Michael's insistence. I started seeing a therapist specializing in both grief counseling and family trauma. Dr. Winters helped me work through not just the acute pain of losing Emma, but the lifelong pattern of emotional neglect I'd experienced. What you're describing is a lifetime of being treated as less important, less valuable than your brother, she observed during one session. The funeral incident wasn't an anomaly. It was simply the most extreme example of a pattern that's existed your entire life. Working with her, I began to see how I'd normalized behavior that was anything but normal. How I'd blamed myself for not being worthy of the love and attention lavished on Jason. How I'd spent decades trying to earn what should have been freely given. At home, Michael's protective instincts went into overdrive. When Jason texted me an angry message about causing drama in the family by refusing to speak to our parents, Michael nearly drove to his house for a confrontation. I talked him down, explaining that engaging with Jason would only fuel the fire. They don't get it, I told Michael. They honestly believe they did nothing wrong, that I'm overreacting to some minor slight. Then maybe they need to understand exactly what they did, Michael said, his voice hard with suppressed anger. His words sparked something in me. Maybe that was exactly what needed to happen. Not just cutting them off, which affected me as much as it affected them, but making them truly understand the magnitude of their actions and face real consequences. My parents had always been deeply concerned with appearances, their standing in the community, their reputation among friends, their image as devoted parents and grandparents. These things mattered enormously to them. They maintained a carefully curated public image that bore little resemblance to the reality I'd experienced. What if that facade were dismantled? What if people knew the truth? I began researching my parents' social circles. Dad was heavily involved in the local country club, serving on committees and playing golf with business associates every weekend. Mom volunteered with several prestigious community organizations and prided herself on her position as treasurer of her garden club. They hosted dinner parties for their influential friends and made donations to the right charities. Image was everything. Over dinner one night, I shared my thoughts with Michael. I've spent my whole life protecting them from the consequences of how they treat me. What if I stopped doing that? Michael set down his fork. giving me his full attention. What are you thinking? I'm thinking about truth, about letting people see who they really are. For the first time since Emma died, I felt a sense of purpose cutting through the fog of grief. I opened my laptop and began making notes, dates, events, text messages, social media posts. I documented everything related to Emma's funeral and my parents' choice, creating a timeline that couldn't be denied or explained away. My plan wasn't about revenge, though that would have been understandable. It was about accountability, about refusing to participate any longer in the fiction that my parents were the devoted, loving people they pretended to be. It was about standing up for Emma, for myself, and for the truth. As I worked late into the night, organizing my thoughts and planning my approach, I felt Emma's presence, not in any supernatural way, but in the conviction that I was finally taking a stand that honored her brief life. My daughter deserved grandparents who would have moved heaven and earth to say goodbye to her properly, since she hadn't had that. The least I could do was ensure they faced the truth of their failure. My parents had made their choice, prioritizing a pool party over their granddaughter's funeral. Now they would experience the consequences of that choice in ways they never anticipated. 3 months after Emma's funeral, my parents' social calendar was in full swing. Summer in Atlanta meant garden parties, charity events, and their biggest social occasion of the year, their country club anniversary party, celebrating 35 years of membership with a lavish event for 200 of their closest friends. I had spent these months carefully preparing. My documentation was meticulous. Screenshots of Jason's Instagram posts timestamped during Emma's funeral, text messages from my parents explaining their decision, a timeline of events that couldn't be disputed. I had written a clear, factual account of what had happened without emotional language or exaggeration. The unvarnished truth was damning enough without embellishment. I began by reaching out privately to my parents' closest friends, not all at once, but selectively. Starting with those I knew to be parents and grandparents themselves, I sent simple emails with the subject line, "Why my parents weren't at their granddaughter's funeral," and attached my documentation to Margaret and William Peters, my mother's best friends for 20 years. I thought you should know the truth before the anniversary party. My parents made a choice that day that I'm still struggling to comprehend. To Robert Kingsley, my father's golf partner and business associate, as someone who speaks often about family values, I thought you should be aware of this situation before continuing your business relationship with my father. To the president of my mother's garden club, as you consider next year's leadership positions, you should have all the information about the current treasurer's character and priorities. I was careful never to ask anyone to take specific action or to spread the information. I simply presented the facts and let people draw their own conclusions. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Margaret Peters called me directly, her voice shaking with emotion. "Rachel, I cannot believe what you've shown me. We've known your parents for decades, and I just can't fathom making such a choice. William and I are absolutely heartbroken for you." 2 days later, I learned they had canceled their RSVP to my parents' anniversary party. Robert Kingsley sent a brief but powerful email. "Thank you for sharing this difficult information. I have 4 grandchildren myself, and I cannot imagine prioritizing any social event over such a solemn family obligation. I'll be reconsidering some pending business arrangements with your father." Within a week, 10 couples had withdrawn from the anniversary party. My mother's garden club president requested a meeting with her to discuss concerns that have been raised. 2 of my father's regular golf foursomes suddenly had scheduling conflicts indefinitely. I also made strategic use of social media, not by posting publicly, but by sending direct messages to mutual connections with links to Jason's pool party posts alongside the funeral details. I never editorialized or asked people to react in specific ways. The juxtaposition of timestamps and images spoke volumes without any commentary from me. The fallout came swiftly. My mother called from an unfamiliar number, having realized I'd blocked her regular one. "What have you done?" she demanded, her voice trembling with anger and panic. "Margaret and William just canceled coming to our party. So did the Hendersons. And the Jacobsons. People are making excuses left and right. Someone mentioned Emma's funeral. What are you telling people? The truth, Mom, just the truth. You're twisting things, making us look terrible. Am I? All I've shared are the facts and the timeline. Jason's own social media posts show you at his party during Emma's funeral. There's no twisting needed. This is vindictive and cruel. Rachel, you're trying to destroy our reputation." "No, Mom, I'm just no longer protecting it at my own expense." My father's call came the next day, his voice cold with fury. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Robert Kingsley just pulled out of our development project. 30 years of friendship down the drain because you've been spreading malicious gossip. It's not gossip if it's true, Dad. Did you or did you not choose to attend Jason's pool party instead of Emma's funeral? That was a private family decision. You had no right to share it with my business associates. And you had an obligation to be at your granddaughter's funeral. We all make choices. Dad, these are the consequences of yours." Jason's reaction was the most volatile. His text message was filled with expletives, accusing me of ruining the family and turning everyone against us out of jealousy. He claimed I'd always been resentful of him and was using Emma's death to attack him and our parents. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say to someone who viewed his niece's funeral as an inconvenient scheduling conflict and who couldn't understand why his party shouldn't have taken precedence. As the weeks passed, the social consequences for my parents mounted. Their anniversary party, usually the highlight of their summer, was sparsely attended. People who did come whispered throughout the evening, casting uncomfortable glances their way. Several of my mother's volunteer organizations found reasons to restructure their leadership, removing her from positions of visibility. My father's business contacts became suddenly unavailable or noncommittal about future projects. They made increasingly desperate attempts to contain the damage. Mom called me in tears, begging me to tell people there's been a misunderstanding. Dad suggested I send a retraction email saying I'd been emotionally distraught and exaggerated the situation. Jason demanded I post on social media that I'd blown things out of proportion due to grief. To each request, my response was the same. I've only told the truth. If you're uncomfortable with people knowing what you did, perhaps you should have made a different choice. This wasn't about punishing them. It was about refusing to participate any longer in the fiction that their behavior was normal or acceptable. It was about standing in my truth after decades of minimizing their emotional neglect. And it was about honoring Emma by insisting that her funeral deserved the basic respect of her grandparents' attendance. The most revealing moment came when my mother called yet again, this time with a different approach. "Rachel, I understand you're upset. We should have handled things differently. But surely you can see this has gone far enough. People are judging us harshly without understanding the full situation." "And what is the full situation? Mom, what context makes missing your granddaughter's funeral for a pool party understandable?" Her silence spoke volumes. "That's what I thought," I said quietly. "There is no explanation that makes it okay. Not to me, and not to anyone who hears about it. For the first time in my life, I wasn't absorbing their behavior, making excuses for it, or shouldering the emotional burden of their choices. I was simply allowing the natural consequences to unfold. And in doing so, I found a strength I never knew I possessed." 1 year after Emma's death, Michael and I stood together at her grave, placing fresh flowers beside the small headstone. The spring air carried the scent of blooming dogwoods, and birds sang in the cemetery's towering oaks. The acute, jagged edges of our grief had softened somewhat, though the loss remained a constant presence in our lives. "I can't believe it's been a year," I said, ranging a small stuffed rabbit, like the one that had sat atop her casket, against the stone. Michael squeezed my hand. She would have been walking by now, maybe saying a few words. The thought brought fresh tears. But they came more gently now. We had learned to carry our grief, to integrate it into our lives rather than being consumed by it. Therapy had helped, as had the unwavering support of Michael's family and our friends. We had established a small foundation in Emma's name too. Fund Sid's research, channeling our pain into purpose. My relationship with my parents had undergone a seismic shift. 3 months after I began sharing the truth about their absence at Emma's funeral, they had finally requested a meeting, not at our house, but at a neutral coffee shop. As if we were business associates rather than family, they arrived looking noticeably different. My father had lost weight, and my mother's usual impeccable appearance seemed slightly disheveled. The social consequences of their actions had clearly taken a toll. "Thank you for meeting with us," my father began formally. "We've had a lot of time to reflect on what happened last year." My mother nodded, unusually subdued. "We made a terrible mistake, Rachel. We should have been at Emma's funeral. Nothing was more important than that." I studied their faces, looking for sincerity. "What made you realize that?" "The fact that people now know who you really are, or genuine regret." My father shifted uncomfortably. "Does it matter? We're acknowledging we were wrong." "It matters to me," I said firmly, "because this isn't just about Emma's funeral. It's about a lifetime of making me feel less important, less worthy of your attention and love than Jason." The funeral was just the most extreme example. My mother's eyes filled with tears. "We never meant to make you feel that way. Jason just needed more. He wasn't as self-sufficient as you." "That's not an excuse. That's exactly the problem. You saw my independence as a reason to ignore me, not as something to celebrate or nurture." For the first time, they seemed to actually listen. The conversation was painful but necessary, covering decades of hurt and neglect. No single meeting could resolve everything, but it was a start. The first time I'd spoken my truth without filtering it to protect their feelings. At the end, I laid out my terms for any potential reconciliation, a public acknowledgement of their absence at Emma's funeral and their regret for that choice, a substantial donation to our Sid's Research Foundation, and family counseling if we were to have any relationship moving forward. To my surprise, they agreed. 2 days later, my father posted a brief but direct statement on his social media accounts, acknowledging their profound regret for choosing not to attend our granddaughter Emma's funeral and announcing a donation to the foundation. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. Probably the most honest public statement they'd ever made. Jason remained distant and angry, unable to accept any responsibility for his role in the situation. He continued to view himself as the victim, telling mutual acquaintances that I had manipulated the situation to turn our parents against him. I let go of any expectation that he would ever understand or change. Standing at Emma's grave a year after her death, I reflected on how much had changed, not just in my relationships, but in me. For the first time in my life, I was setting boundaries based on what I deserved rather than what would keep the peace. I was no longer contorting myself to fit into the narrow space my parents had allocated for me in their lives. Michael and I had spent hours discussing whether to try for another child. The decision was complicated by grief, fear, and hope in equal measure. After much consideration and therapy, we had decided to try again. The positive pregnancy test 3 weeks earlier had brought a complex mixture of emotions, dripping with anxiety, excitement shadowed by the fear of another loss. "Emma will always be our firstborn," Michael said now, as if reading my thoughts. "This new baby won't replace her." "I know," I nodded, placing my hand over my still flat stomach. "But she helped me become the mother I want to be for her memory and for this baby." My relationship with my parents had settled into something civil, but fundamentally changed. We saw them occasionally, always in public settings, or with Michael's family present. They were careful now, almost walking on eggshells around me. conscious that I would no longer accept scraps of attention or dismiss hurtful behavior. When we announced the new pregnancy, their response was appropriately enthusiastic and focused, without mentions of Jason or his latest projects. Whether this represented genuine growth or simply a fear of further social consequences, I couldn't be sure. But I no longer needed their approval or validation to feel whole. The most profound change was in my understanding of family itself. Blood relations weren't automatically entitled to unconditional love and acceptance. Family was defined by actions, by showing up, by choosing to be present for both joys and sorrows. Michael's parents had embodied this truth, standing beside us through the darkest moments of our lives. As we prepared to leave the cemetery, I placed one last kiss on my fingertips and pressed them to Emma's headstone. "Thank you," I whispered, "for teaching me what matters, for showing me my own worth." 6 months later, when our son Noah was born healthy and screaming, I felt Emma's presence in the delivery room, not in any mystical way, but in the strength I'd found through losing her. When my parents arrived at the hospital, appropriately respectful and bearing thoughtful gifts, I was able to accept their presence without resentment. They would never be the parents or grandparents I had once wished for, but we had found a new equilibrium based on truth rather than pretense. Emma's brief life had changed me forever. Through the devastating pain of her loss and the betrayal that followed, I had discovered a resilience I never knew I possessed. I had learned that standing in your truth, however uncomfortable, brings a freedom that no amount of peacekeeping or people-pleasing ever could. What would you have done in my situation? Was I right to make my parents face social consequences for their choice, or should I have kept family matters private? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to stand up for yourself even again. Saint family, thank you for listening to my story, and remember that sometimes the most painful experiences teach us exactly who deserves a place in our lives.